Last night, Federico Valverde produced one of the best Champions League performances that I have ever seen. Pep Guardiola's Manchester City simply couldn't deal with him. His athleticism, his versatility, his technical quality, and of course his rather impressive finishing. I don't say this very often, but Valverde was impossible to play against. Now in this game, Valverde played on the right side of the midfield, at times in a 4-4-2, at times as the right winger in a 4-3-3, immediately showing just how versatile this fella is. But Manchester City are one of the best attacking teams anywhere in Europe, yet Real Madrid managed to reduce them to just 0.59 expected goals, and that is largely because of Valverde and his versatility, his intensity and his defensive work rate. You see, down the right hand side he had two main defensive jobs, and they were crucial to nullifying Manchester City. Job number one was to stop Nico O'Reilly. O'Reilly for Manchester City is a great young left back who through the academy was actually more of a central midfielder. So his tactical role, particularly in the early stages of this game, was actually to invert into midfield, with Manchester City looking to overload Real Madrid in the centre of the pitch, with O'Reilly, Silva, Rodri and Semenyo all joining the middle of the pitch here. However, Valverde did a fantastic job defensively of tucking into the midfield, making sure that O'Reilly couldn't create the overload. You can see Valverde here, right on the toes of O'Reilly, and also once again here, and it just kept happening in the first half, meaning that Manchester City couldn't create the dominance in the middle of the park that they were looking for. However, it did leave Doku 1 versus 1 against Trent Alexander-Arnold. Now, Doku is one of the best dribblers on the planet, one of the most exciting players to watch, and Trent is a fantastic fullback, but he's not elite defensively, although he did do rather well in this game, partly because Valverde was now doing the dual role of also helping out over here, at times applying pressure directly to Doku to put the tackle in, and at times acting almost as a sweeper behind the defence. You can see him here just standing there waiting for Doku to beat Trent before Valverde is able to sweep in. You can see his defensive contributions, first of all in the middle of the pitch towards O'Reilly, and then also out wide helping to deal with Doku. Valverde was fantastic defensively, and he didn't stop from minute 1 to minute 90. Valverde also played a really important role on the ball as well, which will come as no surprise when we're talking about a player that scored a hat-trick in this game. But actually I'm going to start off with something a little bit different, something that might have gone under the radar, and this was the way that Valverde was a focal point for this Real Madrid team. You see, Manchester City in 2026 are actually a pretty good pressing side. They often play in a sort of a diamond defensively. So we've got the back four here, that's quite obvious. We've then got Rodri holding in midfield. Then you get Doku, Bernardo Silva and Savio on the right side, forming that diamond with Semenyo and Haaland as the front two. However, what Real Madrid did really effectively, and Arbeloa deserves a lot of credit for this, was overloaded the Manchester City midfield. So Tchouaméni and the young Spanish midfielder in here really overloaded Bernardo Silva in this part of the pitch, which caused, at times, Rodri to jump a little bit higher, which meant when Brahim Diaz would then drop a little bit deeper, he would follow him. This now means that Valverde was essentially on long balls 1 versus 1 against Nico O'Reilly. Now O'Reilly himself is a physical presence. He's tall, he's strong and he's pretty decent in the air, but Valverde was simply too much for him. And in situations where Madrid couldn't necessarily play through the first phase, they had this brilliant opportunity just to boot the ball onto Valverde. And I'll put a couple of examples on screen now. Valverde was dominant in this aerial battle. In fact, in this game, he won 3 out of 5 aerial duels. He battled really well, and for Real Madrid, what this does, particularly as the game goes on and they start to score more goals, is it just takes the risk away from playing in the first phase, because they had this almost guaranteed method of ball progression. Go long to Valverde in the air and then play on that second ball. It was really, really effective, and something that I don't think many people will be talking about. Now, something that will be getting a bit more credit this morning and more of the headlines was the hat-trick from Valverde. He was absolutely immense in this game. The finishing was fantastic, and tactically he was one of Real Madrid's most important players. But also, so was Brahim Diaz, who started this game up front for Real Madrid in the absence of Kylian Mbappe. Now, what Diaz did so effectively in this game was ran away from the goal. He ran away from goal-scoring situations, he dropped himself a little bit deeper, trying to nestle in behind the Manchester City midfield and just ahead of the Manchester City centre-backs. So Diaz would regularly find himself in these sorts of spaces, in these gaps here. And what he was constantly doing, anytime any player had the ball and was looking to play a pass, Diaz was always coming towards the ball. He wasn't standing still, he was always making a motion. He was always moving towards the ball in these situations. And of course, what that naturally does is it causes the Manchester City defenders to react. Diaz or Guehi, they have to follow him, they have to mark him, because they don't want the midfield to become outnumbered in this situation here. However, this is great. Diaz is dropping into these positions, he's getting on the ball, he's a good technical player. But for this to really be effective, you have to have someone that is willing to run the other way past the ball. If one player is coming towards the ball, the other has got to go past the ball and now attack that space. And that is how Real Madrid was so effective in the final third in this game. Every time one player came towards the ball, often Diaz, Valverde was the one making the penetrating run in behind. We can actually see that on the first goal here. Yes, this is a long kick from the goalkeeper, but as the ball is played forward, you will notice that Diaz has dropped a little bit deeper, and that's brought Guehi out of position. That is the reason why Valverde was 1 versus 1 against O'Reilly. And of course, Valverde was willing to make that run beyond. He does incredibly well, wins the first contact, and then shows that composure to round the goalkeeper and slot the ball into the back of the net. That's that combination appearing for the first time. Then we've got it again here. You will notice that Diaz moves away from the Manchester City defence. He just comes towards Vinicius Jr. on the ball. And again, Valverde is willing to make the run in behind. So Diaz creates the space, and then Valverde attacks the space. And this finish is fantastic on the so-called weaker left foot. It is an absolutely brilliant goal, created because Diaz creates the space and then Valverde goes into it. And then the third goal, once again Diaz dropping a little bit deeper. This time he is the one with the ball at his feet, but you can see that he has got the attention of the Manchester City defenders. So whilst all the defenders are looking at Diaz, Valverde decides to run in behind. He attacks the space. The ball in behind is absolutely brilliant. The touch from Valverde is an absolute joke, and then the finish is really good as well. And again, it comes from that dynamic between these two. They worked so well with each other. So basically, that is how Valverde destroyed Manchester City. He was so important in this game. Of course, the hat-trick grabs the headlines. It's a fantastic hat-trick. The goals are so good. Just look at the goal map. The 3 very different types of finishes, but all equally excellent. It was a brilliant attacking performance. But we've also seen today the defensive work that he did. There's not many players that can score those 3 goals, but are also willing to defend their own byline with such frequency. But he does such a good job, and then the physical work in between, winning those long balls. He was also good on his dribbles in this game, carrying the ball forward. This was a complete wide midfield performance from Valverde. Absolutely fantastic. And should Real Madrid do well in this tournament this year, this performance will be one that goes down in history as one of the greats. Valverde was unstoppable. He was impossible to play against, and Manchester City found out the hard way that you cannot underestimate this Real Madrid team, because the quality in the squad, even with Mbappe and Jude Bellingham missing, is absolutely ridiculous. And Valverde is one of those players who can perform on the biggest nights. And last night he did. He was absolutely fantastic. But that is everything that I wanted to say for today's video. So we're going to wrap up there. Thank you guys very much for watching this one. I hope you have enjoyed it. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.